the Soviet news agency did not say anything about shooting down the plane. It was a crazy dispatch. It said the plane came in, it ignored warnings. Soviet planes rose into the air to try to guide the plane to a nearby airfield. It ignored all warnings and kept going in the direction of the Sea of Japan. No word about a shot or anything.
But it was a civilian plane. A civilian. It wasn't a military plane.
Time. They were tracking the plane for hours. It wasn't just, it looked at first glance like a bomber. No explanation. I cannot think. Dick Cavett couldn't think. This was several hours ago. We've had every minute that goes by now that we don't get interrupted by Andropov himself with hands shaking on Soviet television apologizing for this incident. Every minute that goes down now nails down the conclusion that the Soviet Union wants an international incident and not a small one, a big one.
Yes, probably you're right, and we have to wait. And then I don't know what kind of explanation they're going to present.
No, as you say in Russian, pojivem увидим.
Pojivem увидим.
That means we'll live and we'll see.
Yes, but let's just hope to see something better.
Alla, you are a Soviet immigrant to the United States. You run a translation agency, not just in the Russian language, but in many others, changing of things. Charles Wiley, founder of the Committee for Responsible Patriotism, combat correspondent, writer, lecturer, professor at nearby colleges, and a man who travels the country speaking for accuracy in media.
One of the things that has astounded me is the great surprise at the fact that the Soviets have done it, even on the part of people like you, who are so aware of these people. And you know what the problem is, Barry, is that we all, and I include me here, we all have short memory spans, and we start to forget the horrors of concentration camps. We start to forget the horrible things that are done in the past. I think probably we have an eraser in our mind because we just don't even want to think about them. And one thing that has not been mentioned, except in pieces, but not in total, is that the Soviet Union and other communist countries have historically, and we are talking back a half a century, have always considered any infringement on their airspace to be an excuse to shoot down anybody. I have had a personal situation in which I was involved where I watched how the system worked. You mentioned earlier today that they had shot down an Israeli airliner back in the 40s. I think it was 1958.
No. I'm talking about Bulgaria.
Yeah, right, Bulgaria. Bulgaria shot down an Israeli airliner as it went up the Bulgarian-Yugoslav border. And I think it was 58, not the 40s. But they have shot down on that particular border, the Yugoslav-Bulgarian border, they shot down at least one. And they shot at and forced down others. And I happened to fly that corridor one time on my way. I went from the Middle East, and I got a Pan Am flight out of Istanbul, and I was on my way to Germany. I think Munich, Frankfurt, someplace up in Germany. And the route took us right on that border where Yugoslavia and Bulgaria touch. And at one point, we had some weather. And the pilot came on the usual thing about we've had some weather problems here, and please put on your seat belts. It'll only be temporary, and we're going to change altitude. We're going to get to some clear air, and please stay with us, gang. Okay, I was on the starboard side, which was the Bulgarian border side. Now, remember, this is a plane that flies regularly, probably every day, on that same route. And the Bulgarians, who are just in their Air Force and their KGB operations, lackeys of the Soviet Union, the Bulgarians know that those planes go over there every day, and they know exactly what the courses are. As we went up, and as I looked out the window, I was looking at mist, and suddenly I saw pure blue sky. We had climbed over these clouds, these storm clouds, and we were up in the brightness of the day. And my eyes moved across the horizon, and there, perhaps a quarter of a mile away, flying alongside of us, were two Bulgarian MiGs with there on that flight, and I talked to other people on the ground, and they told me that that is routine. That what these guys did on any of those frontiers over there was that whenever there was bad weather, when they knew that airliners might stray across their lines, that they always scrambled the MiGs or whatever, and that they went up there and they would wait above the weather for people to come out, so that if they were of the slightest bit on their side of the line, they would have an excuse to force them to land, shoot fire across their bow, etc. And there have been numerous instances. I don't know if anybody could do it.
Charles, they didn't.
Peaceful coexistence when they were shooting down planes. Incidentally, we didn't go over the Bulgarian border. That's why they didn't force us down. But they have forced the number down. The Chinese communists shot down when they were still allied with the Soviet Union before they became friendly to us. The Chinese communists shot down a Cathay Pacific airliner out of Hong Kong over the Pacific, and then went down and strafed the passengers in the water. Now, you see, so many people forget these things happen. But there are the Yugoslavs when they were in the Stalin orbit.
Shot down
an American plane.
Two in 1947, I think.
And this has happened repeatedly, and for every one they shot down, they've shot it a lot more, and they've forced a lot more to land. So I don't find anything, terribly surprising. It's appalling, it's disgusting, and it gives you some idea of the kind of people that we're dealing with. But I don't think that it is surprising.
To vent some frustration.
Oh, I'll vent the frustration. I just wouldn't act.
No, wait a minute. I've got a target. Senator Cranston. Now, there'll be no emotional outburst in this courtroom. Senator Cranston and others have, I think, incorrectly, perhaps unconscionably, used this tragedy to further what they have been saying all along about the threat of accidental nuclear war. They are saying, you see, when we're in a hair-trigger world, anything can happen. And I think that not just it's bad enough to muddle an issue when you deliberately muddle an issue from a very high altitude, and the Senate potential presidential candidate or presidential candidate and potential nominee, maybe potential president. That's a very high altitude. In other words, I accuse Senator Cranston of knowing good and well that was an act of many hours. It was not. I woke up. I said this in the last hour. It is not. I woke up in a daze and saw the shadowy figure and opened fire before I realized it was Grandma. You understand? This is as far as you can get from hair, trigger, nerves, causing an accidental nuclear war. They knew it was a civilian plane. They knew it was unarmed.
For 2.5 hours.
For 2.5 hours, and I don't think it's right for anybody to use this in a very crucial domestic political argument, particularly that incorrectly.
100%. There have been a few reactions that really bother me. There are some people who will go to any lengths, for example, to find some justification for anything the Soviet Union does. And I heard a couple of them today. He was one. There were others. I heard on the Nightline program last night when Ed Liplock was pointing out that the Soviets are the only people in the world that do this kind of thing. Immediately Barry Dunsmore, I guess his name is, from ABC's Washington Bureau, jumped in to say how he had to disagree with him about that because, after all, others did it. The Israelis shot at a Libyan airliner over the Sinai not too long ago. And as Liplock pointed out, one, you picked one of the rare exceptions where anybody else has ever been involved in that, and two, Israel and Libya are virtually at war. And the situation is so different that it's unbelievable where the Israelis had seconds to react, and these guys had 2.5 hours to track.
Charles, stop. There's more. The Israelis did not, don't forget, the Israelis, after all, have a history of terrorists coming by air and Lud Airport and everything. But in spite of that, they nursed the Libyan plane down. It had lowered its flaps. They thought it was landing. Then it pulled the monkey shine. So you do not feel that you have to jump in and give Israel mouth-to-mouth resuscitation for what it did to the Libyan airline.
Oh, I but can you imagine this man wanting to jump in there right away and say, well, this is no different than every, it's mind-boggling. Somebody was on a program earlier today saying that this kind of an aircraft has the same configuration on some radars as a B-52. I have heard explanations, one right after the other, that are just mind-boggling.
And the Soviets have never seen that configuration before.
That's right. They didn't know for 2.5 hours that even when they eyeballed it, they had a sighting. They had the pilot that fired apparently had a sighting. And 8 different aircraft were in the air at one point or another.
Charles, the Korean airline said that the radio, according to another Korean pilot headed the other way, that radio contact was apparently dead in the plane. Right?
Yeah, and also the Russians are claiming, which would back that up, which would give them less of a reason to have anything. They are saying that the plane had no lights, was not responding to signals. Clearly and obviously, if what the Soviets are saying is true about that, and if the Korean pilot's report is correct, and we have no reason to think it's not, well, then perhaps something happened to the electrical system of that plane, and they were not able to contact anybody. There were no maydays that came out or anything else.
Right. That puzzled me.
Listen to Barry Farber long enough, your own feelings will be sooner or later expressed. That's what just happened to me. I called because of remarks of Senator Cranston, and also because of remarks of Senator Ted Weiss, Democrat of New York, who's on the Foreign Affairs Committee. He claimed it's sort of an accident that happened, and this is the type of thing that might happen in a nuclear war. And this is another reason why I despise the liberal left.
Story about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll never forget the story about the elephant next to the Soviet diplomat. And the American looks over at the Russians, over at the Soviet, and says to him, "Why'd you bring that elephant?" The Soviet just looks over and says, "What elephant?" I'll never forget that story.
I'd forgotten it. I think it's funny again.
As far as
It won't be that long.
Okay, you people from Eastern Europe, you have a special obligation in America because you know what we are arguing about. You have been there, you have lived under those systems, you know those people, and it's your job to go up to American intelligentsia, including Democratic presidential candidates apparently, and let them know a little of what you know. Okay?
It would be my pleasure. Observations, Barry. 1 year from today will be September 2nd, 84. We will be in the midst of a presidential election, and this incident will primarily be forgotten, and the U.S. and Ronald Reagan in particular will be accused of generating the Cold War again. Secondly, this is, quote, an international incident, Barry. I think this is a perfect litmus test for the Russians to see what the free world would do if they would perhaps go into something a little bit more dastardly as the invasion of Poland.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the invasion of Poland, Afghanistan, see, there are, let's take a little, let's play some sandbox politics here. I sometimes, when I'm making political science tests, here's my favorite political science test question. The Soviet Union attacks the following, the Soviet Union sends troops into the following places. List them in order of outrage. And the places are Moldavia, Poland, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Now, those are 5 different places and 5 different categories of outrage if Soviet troops go there, strike there.
Right.
Now, you know that that the least outrageous would be Moldavia, which is today inside the Soviet Union in Soviet hands. I mean, if there's a peasant uprising there and they send troops there, all right, they call it an internal matter of police action.
Right.
Moving up the scale of outrage, we go to Poland. It is a communist country bound to the Soviet Union by the Warsaw Pact. Mind you, still, I'm not putting Vaseline around the razor blades. It's all an outrage, but there are outrages, and the only valuable people are the ones who understand these things.
Right.
All right, so moving up, Soviet troops go into Poland. That's outrage of the 2nd degree. Moving up. We then go into Sweden, which is, we then go into Finland. That's the 3rd order of outrage going up. Finland is a It is Finlandized. It has a special, it exists as a free country only because the Soviet Union allows it to and can change its mind at will. Finland has no military power. Their newspapers are censored by the Are you aware that Finnish editors in a free country, democracy, cannot offend the Soviet Union?
Yes, sir, but again, these are all excuses for not doing anything.
Exactly. Wait a minute now. So then, do we send the Soviet troops in our sandbox into Sweden? That's outrage of the fourth kind, because Sweden is non-Soviet, non-Iron Curtain. It's not Finlandized. It's a European neutral. Soviet troops go into Norway. That's as outrageous as you can get, because Norway is a member of NATO, the Western Alliance. So and there are outrages, and there are outrages. You say this outrage is going to be forgotten. It's hard to imagine forgetting it on the second day of it. I promise you, I'm not going to forget it. I don't think you're going to forget it. Are we not giving the media a little too much amnesty here? When the media decides to forget it, brother, then it is forgotten.
It's not so much forgotten, Barry, as it a year from today it'll be a little bit more twisted.
Well, how can you twist the shooting down of a plane that you knew to be a civilian airliner?
Well, Barry, it always seems to happen. How can the whole Afghan situation be forgotten? How can Czechoslovakia and Hungary be forgotten, and all the other places we've mentioned? It just happens. Whether it's meant to happen or not, I don't know, but it just happens.
All right, look, you and I know that the truth of Afghanistan is that if there were a free election, 99% of the Afghan population would want the Soviets out. They would want nothing whatever to do with Soviet occupation or Marxist regimes. It is a devoutly religious Muslim country, and they don't want the Soviet system imposed on them. However, the Afghan situation is muddled because they did the old Soviet trick of having a Marxist regime call for help, you see.
Yes.
Call for help from their Soviet brothers across the border. So that is muddled. It's not muddled in your mind. It's not muddled in my mind, but it is technically muddled. But the Korean airliner is in no wise muddled. We know they shot it. The world will know they shot it. Just read, I like what Bill Rusher called the TASS announcement. He said that insipid pack of lies from TASS. Now, read it. It's not even trying. That TASS account, I'll bet you right this minute the people who wrote that TASS account are kicking their wives and biting their mattresses and drinking vodka and crying because they are humiliated that they had to sit down and write something as patently lying as that. But it's like a boxer throwing a fight. That TASS dispatch isn't even trying to convince anybody.
Sure, Barry, and Secretary of State George Shultz has made a very excellent statement calling it a lie and pretty much condemning it. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad to see that we finally had some quick action to their propaganda.
Well, McCarthyite days of 1951 and 1952, the Soviet Union is... Well, wait a minute. I've got... Here. When Reagan said that the Soviet Union represented evil, look at the volcanic eruption of liberals, intellectuals who thought that was the most pig-headed, stupid statement a president could make. Now, which side were you... Forget the Korean plane. When the president said the Soviet Union represents evil, what were you saying to your next of kin?
That he was right, but I don't know. They proved it right after World War II. We had the Berlin airlift. We lost 29 pilots. And they never were our friends.
I was not aware of that. Were there plane crashes during the Berlin airlift?
Yeah, we lost 29 pilots.
No kidding. What, with...
And we still play ball with them.
We lost 29 pilots in crashes or what?
Crashes, and I don't know if they were shot down, but it was crashes. 29 pilots who lost their lives in the Berlin airlift.
Well, explain this to me. I was not aware of doves and hawks in that day. I remember General Patton.
Yeah.
But if we lost 29 lives because of the Soviets illegally barring our access to West Berlin 2 years after victory,
right.
They didn't have an atomic bomb for 2 more years. Why did we take it?
That's right. That's what I want to know. And I spent almost...
They're changed forevermore.
Right.
What you've just done me a favor. I have grown up thinking we were great during the Berlin airlift because thanks to our aviation, our air power, our imagination, our fortitude, we flew over the Soviet blockade and defeated the blockade of Berlin, and we fed West Berlin, and we housed West Berlin, and we warmed West Berlin, and we armed West Berlin, a little island in the communist world. And the Soviets said, shucks, spoiled again. The Americans are too agile. They're too smart. They flew over our heads. Then the Soviets withdrew the blockade, and I consider that an American victory.
Still laughing at it.
Were I back in 1947 today, I would consider somebody who said, let's have an airlift a dove. I would say, let us smash tanks up the Autobahn and achieve the rights that we clearly won by contract after World War II. That's correctly. We don't understand it. We have been lulled by people who either genuinely or fatuously and falsely do not understand the menace of the Soviet Union, do not understand what it's up to. They do not have a talent for standing up to dictatorship. They only have a talent for ridiculing those of us who want to. And it's time for a change.
Other things we can do to punish the Russians. I just want to say what a lady said about how about President Carter and President Reagan, what Mr. Carter did. Mr. Carter, there was one big difference. When they went into Afghanistan, he was appalled. He was shocked. They were such nice guys, he couldn't believe it. Mr. Reagan, in his heart, is not... He knows that these people are capable of doing what they did. He knows what they are, and there's a big difference between those two men.
I agree with you. Lev Navrozov has been called to these and other microphones for many reasons. I never dreamed I would ever have to call Lev Navrozov to these microphones because the Soviet Union that he abandoned, turned his back on, left to join the free world, had carefully, deliberately, with great preparation and obvious premeditation, gunned down a Korean airliner after tracking it for 2.5 hours, making sure it was civilian, unarmed, obviously harmless to the Soviet Union, and they shot it down. We're all in...
Several months ago, in this very studio, we discussed the Soviet attempt to assassinate the Pope. Now, some time has passed, and we can draw some conclusions. All in all, the assassination attempt has done good to the Soviet regime because the revulsion and the protest and the indignation was very weak, and it soon passed. You see, by saying that it is very weak, I emphasize the point that it is not a matter of column inches and headlines and so on and so forth, but this is rather sort of, just some sort of feeling of intensity or not intensity. The Liberal Democrat press was never intense about it. It was always lukewarm. It was always perfunctory.
Embarrassed.
Yes, it was sort of, it did some duty. It was obliged to say something. It was, you felt that it was forced to say that. And of course, this is my usual message, that apart from the Liberal Democrat media, we have only islands like the New York Tribune here in New York, and, just such islands, just elsewhere, because basically, of course, the media are Liberal Democrat, and they create the temper. They sort of, we've heard, some sort of statements by members of the Congress, by senators and congressmen and so on and so forth, but still, the temper is set, the kind of, the public mood is set by the media. And, again, speaking about the Soviet assassination of the Pope, we see that it did them good because it was a successful invasion into the psyche of the Western world. They made an invasion which is more important than the invasion of Afghanistan. They sort of advanced. They said, we can kill individuals, we can assassinate individuals we don't like, and individuals who interfere with what we are doing. And they got away with that. And since they got away with that, that was a moral victory for them. That was an advance. It was like a gangster who is becoming more and more insolent and gets away with that. And in this way, that gangster advances in you. At first, he's insolent, you pay no attention. Then he takes out weapons, you pay no attention. Then he sort of shoots at you and misses, but, you still smile. But it is obvious that the gangster is kind of, is taking over. He's invading you psychologically. He's destroying you psychologically. And that was, just the Soviet assassination of the Pope, of the psyche of the Western world. This may be another successful invasion. In other words, the liberal Democrat media will not react properly. Because here I have the newspapers, all the newspapers of New York for today. The New York Tribune helped me to collect all of them.
For the day the plane was shot down, yeah.
Yes. And
for the day of September the 1st, 1983.
Yeah, well, it's for the day. It's 2 days newspapers. And here is one, for example. It's the Herald-Statesman. The Herald-Statesman has this headline: Jetliner with 269 aboard was shot down, South Korea. Now, please pay attention to the fact that they know that it was shot down, and they know by whom, but they do not say this in the headline. You see, 20 years ago, when there were just newspapers, just different from the general liberal Democrat vintage, because even rags are liberal Democrat, just in their temperament. And, we might expect something like Reds shoot airline, jetliner, something like that, or with 200, something like that. This is not even dynamic. Jetliner with 269 aboard was shot down. This is not even just good jazzy newspaper style. This is, after all, a rag. Just this, the Herald Statesman, meaning no disrespect, but it's this is not a highbrow newspaper, let's put it that way. And even that newspaper doesn't have any jazzy, strong headline. It has Jetline was shot down. That's all. Just avoiding the issue who has shot it. Now, all the other newspapers, well, except the New York Tribune, the New York Tribune is kind of, just an exception to all of them. Already on the first day of the tragedy, I feel already a kind of, please compare, for example, the Phalangist massacre of the Shatila and Sabra camps. On that day, there was something phosphorescent in the air. It was it was galvanizing. It was full of electricity. The impression was that, that a world war was on, something like that. And here, everything so far has been toned down. And no matter what members of the Congress say, that it is horrible and so on, this is not just the temperamental response of the nation, which only the media can create.
All right, hold it. What he's proving is that media that he characterizes as liberal Democrat, I would characterize that media as being even-handed as between dictatorship and freedom. Absolutely fair, even-handed as between the dictators of the world and the democracies of the world. They, I'm sure, in their smug, self-centered, self-righteous arrogance, which they consider benevolence, taking it upon themselves as their holy mission to keep hotheads like me and Lev Navrozov from getting too excited. They want to wet blanket this story. They want to salvage the relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. I'm not so sure what kind of salvage is appropriate at this point. Lev Navrozov, he may continue with your headline review?
At the same time, there is an element of fear. I think, that the liberal Democrat media are afraid, its benevolence toward the Soviet regime is somehow mixed with fear. Because the more powerful and formidable and insolent the Soviet regime becomes, the lower the tone of the media in response. And of course, if you compare, for example, the headlines of the newspapers that are lying all around me, if you compare with that excitement, that sort of, just electricity that filled the air when the phalangists walked into the Shatila and Sabra camps and, just instituted that massacre, it was quite different. At that time, first of all, it was all over television. And it's sort of, as I say, it is difficult to convey it scientifically in the number of column inches and the number of words calculated by computers and so on. What is in that attitude is a kind of, what escapes such studies by computerized or other studies is that emotional level, the emotional level of reaction. And of course, for example, the emotional level of reaction of the media when something happens in Israel, which can be used, just as interpreted as atrocity or sort of aggressiveness, it's quite different than when it happens, something happens with respect to the Soviet regime. And this is, other newspapers may claim that they didn't know, though, just to my mind, this is not planted it. The Herald Statesman, when it says, that the jetliner was shot down, it might have said in its headline that it was shot down by Conyers, by Reds, by Soviets, by whatever, but it avoids the issue. Just as jetline was shot down, South Korea. As you notice, during this intermission, you're quite right. Rather the first, just impression is that South Korea did it. Mm-hmm. They avoid, because there is an element of fear, not only this element of trying to be peaceful and trying to sort of, just to see always the best in the Soviet regime and not to excite, the warmongers and so on. But besides, there is already an element of fear.
Right.
And this is a victory for the Soviet regime because this is kind of, just fear is a
rid of this only theory I've heard that can explain this incredible madness to me.
Well, because you see, as a Western man, you think about it in Western rational terms. You think, that this is very embarrassing.
Yes.
But it is not, because, as I say, this is kind of, this is their advance. It's like the invasion of Afghanistan. It's a certain step forward in their sort of, just in their psychological mastery of the world. They think they will get away with it, just as they got away with their attempt to assassinate the Pope. Nothing has happened, since then, nothing at all. They haven't lost a single, just a single grain, a single dollar. Nothing at all. Nothing has happened, and the United States government has pretended, that the thing never happened. Therefore, they advanced further. That's kind of, that's a good strategy. It's a gangster strategy, of course, but, they are not bourgeois. They are not simply, just people who want to live in peace and make money and buy cars and go to Coney Island or something like that. You understand? They are gangsters. They are mega gangsters, and this is an important psychological step. It's sort of, it's kind of, it's a step in the right direction. It's a step towards the intimidation of the Western world. And one thing more, remember that the world or mankind does not consist of the Western democracies only. It consists also of huge masses of people who are under dictatorship, like Gaddafi, for example. And to people like Gaddafi, this is a good step. They sort of, show that they have the guts. They show that they are tough. And therefore, outside civilized countries, outside Sweden and the United States and Japan, the act will be sort of, just welcomed as a tough step. The Soviets showed, that they are not afraid of those, just Americans and all those.
15 and 20 years trying to engender an atmosphere of peace and détente and friendship, and you can trust us. And whosoever criticizes the Soviet Union and the West is a 1952 Cold War witch-hunting hysterical red baiter.
Because, you understand, your feeling must be ambivalent. You must love the gangster and fear the gangster. You see, it's the same attitude is inculcated into Soviet inhabitants. You see, the Soviet inhabitants are persuaded that the leader, that their government loves them, that it's very affectionate, that it's very kind, that it's very human, and at the same time that it is ruthless, that it knows no scruples. That has been the history since 1918, if you want to know. They always posed as very affectionate, very kind, sentimental. Stalin, for example, posed, of course, just with children, and Lenin posed with children, and they sort of, they loved children, they loved flowers, they sort of, they are very sentimental, and at the same time, you must love them, and you must fear them. Love and fear should be combined in one emotion. You must sort of, you must, yes, it is very difficult to understand. I understand with your sort of, just in this society, it is very difficult to understand. But this is the emotion, the double emotion, the twin emotion that is inculcated into the mind of every Soviet inhabitant. Stalin was so nice. He was so affectionate. He was so kind. There were stories about his kindness. And in the New York Times, incidentally, spread the story how Stalin full of kindness. And at the same time, they are people of steel. And Stalin wanted, just to that the word Stalin means steel. He wanted to show that he is as tough as steel. And incidentally, it's about the same psychology you can find in American gangsters, in classical gangsters like Al Capone, for example. It's, they also cultivated, they were very suave and very sort of affectionate. Al Capone, for example, was very good to children and so on. But at the same time, sort of, every atrocity was a sign of toughness, a sign, that no nonsense, that will... For example, the Soviets suddenly, in 1918, when they established their power, they suddenly shot a very famous and renowned poet for no reason at all. I sort of, he was in some conspiracy, but it was nonsense. He was a poet, but they did it to show, that no nonsense. Remember that we'll shoot Dante, we'll shoot Shakespeare, and no one will say no. And this is, this act couldn't be accidental. Just as you said yourself, for 2 hours they monitored the plane, and of course, the Soviet minor commanders never, take decisions without a prior consultation, and it goes up to the Politburo and so on. And of course, you're right in the sense that the military could be sort of, especially emphatic about it. It is possible that the military have more power than Andropov. And Andropov went away with it, so to speak. And the military said, oh no, just enough of your sort of, gentlemanly, talks, in Brussels, and we don't want that. We want to show that we are tough, and that's what we are.
All right, when we get back together, let's play a very interesting game. Americans have no talent for conspiracy. We never see two things or more as being linked up. We call them separate stories. Meanwhile in Beirut, meanwhile in Manila, meanwhile in Central America, meanwhile in Chad. First, Lev Navrozov, Andropov, Butcher of Budapest, KGB, comes into power. How long would it take to incubate a new policy, a game plan? About as long as a baby, 9 months, let's say. Andropov's been in for about 9 months. Now, look what has gone on lately. I was about to tell my audience that I did not think Ferdinand Marcos, for all of his dictatorial right-wing ways, I did not think Ferdinand Marcos was responsible for the assassination of Aquino, because it would not pay him to assassinate. Look what's going on in the Philippines. Tornadoes, political typhoons against Marcos. You've really got to be a stupid, flat-footed, forgive me, my countrymen, American. And I say American pejoratively because we have less instinct for conspiracy than anybody else in the world. If somebody on Times Square wearing a Greek flag is beating an old lady, hitting her over the head with her pocketbook and yelling, "Long live Greece," an American walking by will say, "Gee, these Greeks are misbehaving." A 10-year-old European will know he's not a Greek, he's a Turkish provocateur. So I was about to do a whole broadcast before the Korean plane incident, simply saying, hey, I don't think Marcos assassinated his political rival. I think it was somebody against Marcos. Gaddafi invades Chad, very fast-moving, as you say, dynamic act with a lot of stamina. The action in Central America continues. The assassination of Aquino in the Philippines. These things, to me, link up somewhere. I think it may be part of an Andropov plan to do something. I'm not sure exactly what, but to take an offensive, to bring a whole new phase, perhaps to see how far he can go before initiating phase 2 of whatever he's got in mind.
Well, it is also possible that they have made a breakthrough in weapons, for example, in laser research and so on. And this breakthrough is so essential and so important that they wanted to send a signal to the outside world that sort of, just we are stronger than you. They cannot sort of, just disclose it, say, just we have, advantages in laser research, which makes us the absolute sovereign of space or whatever. But, they cannot disclose that because that will be, the revelation of a military secret. But they can send a signal of their superiority in this way, saying, that we sort of, just be outraged and be indignant and scream, we don't care a damn.
And why? Murray Barron is president of Accuracy in Media. He is a major figure in my favorite organization, Charles Wiley, who I frequently introduce by his own organization. The Committee for Responsible Patriotism crisscrosses the country, and I hope someday the English-speaking world, on behalf of Accuracy in Media. Let us hear the song that Oscar Brand composed not just for me and for this broadcast, but he happened to do it 20 minutes before we went on the air, and this is the first time in the world. Here.
Sorry, Barry, that you didn't invite Pete Seeger here as well as Oscar Brand, because I think he composes and delivers very moving compositions, and his lyrics are especially of importance to me, and I want to see what Pete Seeger will do to commemorate this unfortunate accident in the air. And at 75 years of age, I'm willing to wait and see what Pete Seeger has to contribute to our edification.
Shall I leave, Murray?
No.
Then I don't understand the entire conversation of the last few minutes.
Oh, and he's being sarcastic.
Oh, my mother told me. Complimentary to you.
Oh, thank you.
And relevant to Peter Seeger.
Well, I think that's not appropriate at the moment. If you let me sing my song, then maybe you can find fault with me. I don't know.
Well, I know you've memorialized a U-boat tragedy, but I'd like to see some literature and some music that'll capture what has transpired in the last 5 days.
I don't think anything can capture it, but there's always an attempt to sing about it. Flight 7 flew on calmly, and everything seemed fine. Steward served a dinner for 269. Some talked, some slept, some read. No one knew what lay ahead. It was sad when that airship went down. It was sad, oh, it was sad. It was sad when the airship went down. Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when the airship went down. Now that 747 was speeding to its goal, from Anchorage, Alaska to South Korea, Seoul. But the Soviet Air Force caught her blundering off her course. It was sad when the airship went down. It was sad, oh, it was sad. It was sad when the airship went down. There were husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when the airship went down. In the front, some folks were laughing when the stewardess come by, 'cause she said some Russian pilots thought the airplane was a spy. She would have told them more, but there came an awful roar. It was sad when the airship went down. It was sad, oh, it was sad. Yes, it was sad when the airship went down. Husbands and wives, little children lost their lives. It was sad when the airship went down. It was sad when that airship went down.
Very good. Bravo, Oscar. As you told me before you played it, you were borrowing from the Titanic. You probably thought you said that on the air, and I wanted the audience to know that you are not plagiarizing the Titanic. You are deliberately adapting the Titanic. The difference that comes crashing across to me is that there was no hatred of the iceberg. There was no animal anger around the world at the iceberg. The iceberg was doing its icebergly thing, sitting there in the shipping lane. Now, the Soviet Air Force, one word in your song I want to get to, if not right away, at least before too much time. That is the word blundered. Did that plane blunder off course? Off course. You don't have to be a Soviet to wonder that. You can be a good, free-thinking person, able to speak his heart and inquire. We had psychically linked. When the Korean airliner was shot down, did you think of that song by Woody Guthrie? What were their names? Oh, what were their names? You sang it here.
I sure did. I thought of another song.
Did you think about that song? About the Reuben James?
Right.
Boys on the Reuben James.
Right. Yeah. A beautiful song. Do you want to hear a piece of it?
Before I introduce Sid Bernstein, go ahead.
It was there in the dark of that uncertain night that they watched for the U-boats, waited for the fight. Then a whine and a rock and the big explosion roared, and it laid the Reuben James on the cold ocean floor. Tell me, what were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the good Reuben James? What were their names? Tell me, what were their names? Did you have a friend on the good Reuben James?
Murray Barron. I didn't know you were 75. You don't look it, but I think that makes you senior, at least in...
confrontation. The line now is modified. But I'm amazed at the reaction of important segments of our population here in the United States, whether it's amongst the churches, amongst certain Jewish groups, amongst business, banking, industrial interests, in the academies and universities, and, of course, in the media. We have here already, and in Western Europe increasingly, not predominant, but large enough to concern all of us. We already have, in the Western world, all the prerequisites for a collapse of will to resist this monstrous tyranny. We have the Catholic bishops, and we have the National Council of Churches. We have the American Jewish Congress and the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. We have the academies with a plenitude of professors and intellectuals who have, to put it crudely, softened up generations of students. We have in politics a gruesome coincidence that two of the major candidates for the presidency of the United States only a few weeks ago pledged, aside from the nuclear freeze, two of them, we'll discuss it later, pledged that they will fly to Moscow if necessary, in contradistinction to this insincere president we have with respect to the nuclear arms negotiations. And we have two major candidates who promised to go to see Andropov personally and silence now with respect to this litmus of what the nature of that beast is. So I speak with feeling here tonight, but later on I want to develop in some depth the fact that this incident is only one of many and one of the lesser incidents, and that the world should have been alerted for 2 generations back.
It occurred to me, but it never reached my tongue, that this 269 has indeed created shock waves that 35,000 Hungarians hardly lived up to in terms of slaughter.
Simultaneously, because many of us fly, we have a universal reaction to what happened. But while this disaster, this monstrosity took place, they are using dreadful, incinerating yellow gas. They are slaughtering Afghans. They're slaughtering Poles. Many Poles have died in the last few months. The attempt on the Pope. The activities in Southeast Asia. So while we mourn this dreadful loss of 269 innocents, the fact of the matter is that this regime is currently and concomitantly slaughtering thousands of others.
Hold it, Farber, and we need psychology, not political science, to answer Murray Barron's stunning challenge, which I'll bet you every brain in America took a flash of that point. Gee, why get so excited about the murder of 269 people against the history of the Soviet Union since the early 1900s? And the answer is psychology. Our crowd is not a member of the Soviet or the pre-Soviet anti-communist elite or army or clergy or class. Our crowd is not a member of the Polish officer corps in World War II. Our crowd never owned its own little plot of land in White Russia. Our crowd did not manufacture homemade bombs to knock out Soviet tanks on the streets of Budapest in 1960. In 1956, our crowd did not picket for Polish freedom beginning in 1980, and our crowd does not live under yellow rain in Afghanistan. But our crowd goes out to JFK and other airports and gets on planes and expects to arrive safely unshot down by Soviet heat-seeking missiles.
Sir, I think it's more than that.
John, wait. There have been a lot of people who have played guitars and sang songs and written songs who were murdered. But it would take it would take many, many millions to equal the impact of the assassination of John Lennon. So I agree with Murray's point of 1,000,000%. I insist the point is psychology, not politics. If you do not realize what Murray said without Murray having to tell you, you are guilty of natural psychology, not bad politics.
And it isn't a division in America between those who say that the Soviet Union is benign and those that say it's malign. What you have now is a remarkable development, and that is people now saying, well, we will concede that you're dealing with an exceptionally irresponsible, criminal, and dangerous adversary. All the more reason to appease them.
Hold it. We'll be right very hard through. I worked with some other friends, and we were trying to get some I'd like to have him say. He did mention the linkage between this and defense. The other thing I wish he would have linked, I wish he would have made it clear that American foreign policy and American military aid policy is directed at keeping Soviet ground controllers out of Central America so they can't raise the Iron Curtain, which we call the sacred airspace of the Soviet Union, up over Central America, so they'll be shooting down American planes, because wherever they go, it becomes the sacred Soviet airspace that no human beings can cross in the air, on the ground, by sea, or any other way.
Yeah.
Let's stop them from getting the rest of the world.
You're unhappy Andropov was with the Reagan speech. Now, the first reaction of a civilized person is, holy mackerel, how could Andropov have liked a speech when the president is playing evidence that he's a liar? I mean, here, while the president is playing the voice of the Soviet pilot, Andropov is sitting there denying that there was a shot.
Well, Barry, your first question is, how did Andropov respond to the discovery the plane had been shot down? That should be your first question, because that's a question of the responsibility of Soviet leadership. Do you think he was happy to discover that they had made a tremendous mistake in propaganda to the world?
There's no evidence that he didn't know about the order. They had that plane for 2.5 hours. Do you think the Soviet command system did not pass it back? They've got a dual command system.
That's the question. Do you think that this was a national policy of the Soviet government to shoot down civilian planes?
They don't have the long-distance problems that the divestiture of AT&T caused in America. It is not that much of a call from Kamchatka to Moscow. And if you're military, you get through easily within 2.5 hours. And the president's speech with my guests, Sid Bernstein, Murray Barron, Oscar Brand, and Charles Wiley. The shooting down of the plane, the president's speech, the international reaction. ... skip a couple lines. Let's get some clean paper here. I want to draw a little circle around the question of how must Andropov feel when he is proven a liar by something the President of the United States has in his back pocket, his hand, plays before the world. Ambassador Kirkpatrick the next day plays the unexpurgated version of the tapes, because we think that's devastating. We think to be proven a murderous liar is a very embarrassing thing. And I think Murray Barron will say it better than I, but to be embarrassed at being proven a liar requires a moral view of the world which does not inhabit Andropov. He felt nothing, not even a technical twinge. Oh, they've proven we're lying? Well, then let's quickly admit it, and 36 hours, we'll look angry, and big deal. So what?
Do you remember the situation at the UN when there was supposed to be a meeting between Khrushchev and Eisenhower? Mm-hmm. And Eisenhower announced that there was no such thing as an American spy plane, at which point the Russians proved there was such a thing, and they said, well, there is such a thing. Eisenhower...
True. They're different, too. In the one case, we had a plane that was flying over the Soviet Union taking pictures. In the other case, you had the wanton murder of 269 people. There is a heck of a difference between the two things. And what's interesting is the Soviet reaction. Lie after lie after lie. And arrogance, unbelievable arrogance, threats, and a coldness in their description of the intruder plane. I've been listening to Radio Moscow regularly since this thing started, and there is just not the slightest sign that they even when they say that they're sorry about the deaths of the people, which they've said, they say TASS reported that the ruling circles of the Soviet Union have expressed regret over what happened to the passengers on the intruder plane. And I mean, it's said with all the warmth of a crocodile embracing you. And these people think in those terms. The orders were given not at this moment. The orders have been given to everybody, every place. Shoot to kill on those borders. shoot to kill people coming in by mistake, shoot to kill people leaving. If their children, shoot at them. If their women, shoot at them. Send the guard dogs at them. Machine gun them. I walked on the Hungarian the Hungarian-Austrian border a few years after the Hungarian uprising, and actually had a couple of young people, as a British girl, walked over to the sign that said, "You are entering Austria." She was on the other side. She was on the Hungarian side of where it said, "You are entering Austria," which meant she was a foot or 4 feet into Hungarian soil, or at least the midpoint, and they shot. I mean, these people are vicious people, and they have trained their border guards. By the way, the border guards are controlled by, guess who? The KGB in the Soviet Union. Oh, but it's under KGB now, Murray. It used to be separate. Now it's part of it.
You cannot be crass enough to say, look, you guys did this. I'm going to do something I've always wanted to do to you, and here's a good opportunity. You don't do that. You link it. It's got to be seamless tailoring. So the comment would have gone something like this. The system which permits the shooting down of a plane, the callous lying about it, non-accountability to anybody, even to their own people, these are symptoms of the Soviet system, a closed system. This system, the same system, is seeking to close in on others not yet enclosed. We are taking this opportunity to resist not just this act, but the system which makes acts like this possible and inevitable. We will, from this point forward, do at least as much to aid the forces for freedom in the world as the Soviet Union has been doing for many, many years to aid the forces of communist enslavement. In other words, linked, non-specific, because a specific threat has to be carried out, or else you're much worse off than before you made it. Open-ended, but just put the Soviets on notice that they are no longer going to have the same clear sailing that they have enjoyed up to now in the Nicaraguas, the El Salvadors, the Angolas, the Mozambiques, even the Afghanistans of the world. Then you have linkage. Then you have people crying out all over the world for aid and comfort from tyranny. This would give people without hope a reason to hope of freedom.
Actually, this was originally written by Sheldon Harnick, who told me not to change it, and I hope he's not listening, or any of his friends. They're rioting in Africa. They're starving in Spain. There's flooding down in Florida. But Texas needs rain. The whole world is festering and looks pretty bad. Syria's in Lebanon, Libya's in Chad. Christians hate the Muslims and the Druze hate them all. And what do they love? A bloody brawl. In faraway Siberia, they're shooting down planes. The PCBs in Oregon are clogging my drains. But we shall be tranquil and grateful and proud, for we've been endowed with a mushroom-shaped cloud, and we can be certain some sunshiny day someone will pull the plug out and blow us all away. Now England took the Falklands back. Nicaragua's red. There's commies in El Salvador. And under my bed. No one trusts anyone, everyone's a spy. Truth is a casualty, survival is a lie. Russia's in Afghanistan, Khomeini's in Iran. What nature doesn't do to us will be done by our fellow man. They're rioting in Africa.
The first rule of show business is never lose your temper at a child, an animal, or a song. Yeah.
Is that all?
Yeah, never. Okay, so I'm going to smile at you like William Buckley smiled at Allen Ginsberg when he read him a poem he composed under LSD on a mountaintop near Kathmandu. Buckley just smiled and said, nice. I'll have some comments later. There will be non-angry comments. There are communists in El Salvador, not under one's bed, and for one to observe that there are communists in El Salvador doesn't necessarily link him to the type of mentality who might suppose there are also at the same time communists under his bed. While the wrathful ridicule goes on about those of us who, that is a what's the use song. Really saying that when something is multiply wretched, it does not make that which is merely wretched good or better. I would not like to be part of a society that shoots unarmed jetliners out of a plane. I can't do much about that except continue to vote for hard-line presidents who will not turn the Pentagon into a daycare center and who realize that communism is a consumer fraud and who realize that democracy is great for children and other growing things. That's all I can do about the society that shoots unarmed civilian planes out of the air. But I'll tell you something, I'm not too excited about being a member of a society where in any tavern, in any part of any city, a crowd of onlookers can cheer as 6 men rape a woman. Come on, the announcement by George McGovern that he will again be a candidate for the presidency of the United States. In music, we call it syncopation, I think. The rhythmic coincidence, beat 1, beat 2, right close together, of the Soviet Union committing the most deplorable act in years, at least since the invasion of Iraq, or at least since the day before yesterday, committing the deplorable act of shooting down a civilian airliner, calling for a free world response, and George McGovern announcing for the presidency of the United States. Sorry, folks, I tried. That's just too good to pass up. We're talking about one more Democrat in the race. We're talking about McGovernism. I have no concept of Mondaleism. I have no concept of Glennism, except I think he's a fine, courageous person. I have no concept of any of the other isms represented by any of the Democrats. I, however, have a very good concept of McGovernism, because one good thing that I will say about George McGovern is he plays with transparent cards. He is not the least bit cagey. There is not one cubic millisquidgen of guile, I don't think, within the whole makeup of Senator George McGovern. I sat there breathtaking as he was giving us point after the things he was saying on Cable News Network in his own voice. Cable News Network sort of stretches things out. If you're really interested, Cable News Network gives you more depth than almost anything I've seen on television. And when George McGovern made some of the confessions that he did just yesterday, the day before his announcement, I made up my mind that I tried. I fought it for a whole day, but I can't fight it any longer. My New York number, you want to know?
Two things I want to talk about, but about McGovern, I like to say that that tires me out to think that this individual, not necessarily because of his political views, but I think that the nation has outgrown all of that, those types from the 60s and from the early 70s too. And it'd be just as ridiculous. I mean, I think it would be just as ridiculous for McGovern to run for president at this point in time as to bring back the tap dance, or as to bring back the juggler. You know what I mean?
I'm not going to have the heart to keep doing this for longer than 1 hour. I promise you. Why are we picking on George McGovern? If it weren't for the coincidence of the Korean airliner and McGovern's, it's almost as though McGovern's announcement, sure, he had a plan before the Russians shot down the plane, but there's something that begs comment when you have those two events side by side.
I agree with that, but I think Barry, I don't think it's picking on McGovern as much as he's in a delusion. I don't know who's advising him. I don't know what planet he's living on. I don't know what era he's living in, but anyone that his perception should be better than that. He's never going to win. He's out of touch. And the fact that he announces that he's going to run after this incident proves just how out of touch he is.
Well, he's out of touch in a way that I'm debating whether or not to get into this on a quick, nervous radio program where natural powers. But let me read George McGovern's mind. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm no longer Barry Farber. In a second and a half, this is George McGovern's mind has a chance.
Why is that?
Do you remember when New York City was a political little jelly bean off to one side, which had its own political way of life? In New York City, for years, between 15 and 20% of the Democrats voted. That's in primaries, that's all. And the leftmost candidate always won. That ended only in 1977 when when the Democratic candidates finished in the order in which they were perceived as conservatives.
Right, I agree. But Barry, Ed Koch was a liberal for a long time.
Oh, but he won the running broad jump. He changed.
I agree.
He changed. Wow. And I'll tell you something. A lot of people on my political side are still standing there, ankles in the mud, arms folded, flint-faced frown, and they're saying, Ed...
him for being able to change over that quick and get elected.
All right, now see, but I mean, I don't oppose that. How can you pretend that you're in the business of trying to win political arguments, to save democracy, to bring people over to your side, and when somebody as popular and influential as Ed Koch comes over to your side, you say, get back over there on the left, you're a liberal. No, I don't say, how dare you change so dramatically, so quickly. I say, welcome, Ed. Welcome, brother.
I agree with that.
I never believe a fact unless it's supported by a theory.
Mm-hmm.
My theory is that George McGovern figures maybe this time America will be what New York City once was, a political area where only a minority of the eligible Democrats vote in primaries, electing the leftmost candidate. I guess he figures there's Democratic revulsion against the rule of Ronald Reagan, and that will manifest itself by speeding to the most anti-Reagan of the... I could see how if you eat enough of the right kind of mushrooms, you can build a George McGovern scenario. But you'd have to eat a lot of mushrooms that are illegal. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, this is Kenny.
Yes, Kenny.
Now, I want to tell you something. I'm going to go slow. This is an amazing story, which I heard. I don't want to identify myself as an anti-communist, okay?
Okay.
Because you think I'm a communist, Soviet apologist, or a communist propagandist for going on the air raids and trying to confuse people. Now, you judge for yourself. Now, I'm going to tell you something, which I put out by the MIT. Now, I'm going to tell you this country's lying, and Soviet bunch is lying. What happened in 1982 was a mock battle between the Soviet Navy. They're fighting over that area. Before that, I'm going to go slow, time. There's 5 choke points over there, the Quasi line and around that area. The United States Navy has...
Kenny, already I need a seeing-eyed dog. What are you talking about?
We're fighting, they're trying to maneuver them in that area over there where the plane was shut down. There is 5 choke points, and the United States got them cut off, got the Soviet Navy cut off. Now, there was a mock battle in February 1982. The Soviet Air Force came at the American Navy with their Sidewinders, with their missiles, and they challenged them. And it was a mock battle, and they went up against them, and then they turned around and went back. There was another one.
I didn't read anything about this.
It's coming out now, MIT, I don't know, listen to me. You can check it out yourself.
Okay.
It's coming out, the story. They're not telling you everything now. There was it's like a big chess game was played. High poker was played in February and March and April. There was another one. The Soviets came up there with their planes, with their MiGs, and the United States went up to meet them. They turned around again. Otherwise, now the thing is, their missiles are no good. The ICM, two of them they tested are no good. Otherwise, our missiles are not so good also. But the thing is, our missiles are better than them, and if we have them already boxed in, you understand? You following me?
Kenny, I would love to see you stand up and address a meeting of the National Security Council.
But you can check this out. This has been brought out. I heard another book. We have them boxed in an area. That's why they keep changing.
What do you make of it?
The make of it?
Yeah.
the second line, we do use a plane. Those people, I think it was a decoy. Now, you understand the quarterback fake?
You think that...
They went up there, and we used a decoy and they went after another plane, and the reconnaissance plane landed, and the Russians were taken.
Kenny...
They were taken. All
right, wait, let me make one more effort to understand your point here. Are you saying that we wanted the Soviets to shoot down the civilian planes?
Well, I don't know. No. They was looking for the frequency and to try to break their code. They don't have to use that. To find out because they wanted to test this IBCD and the anti-missile, which is no good, I don't think, but accidentally they used a decoy on them. You understand? It's a lot more coming out to it now. And the Soviets, listen to me, the Soviets have been taken. Okay,
Ted Kenny. Al Kelly lives, and you do too. Thank you very much. Little Samantha as she stammers discussing Flight 007. So I hate to call somebody who's a little older than Samantha and obviously tough enough to be a major journalist, but I'd like to know what Ted Holmberg, Holmberg, president of the New England Society of Newspaper Editors, says about this story, Dateline Leningrad, last July the 1st. U.S. and Soviet editors adopt exchange plans. A group of New England and Soviet editors agreed today to an exchange of reporters who would work directly for publications in the other country. Did you hear that? The editors meeting here also drafted two other exchanges. One would allow a journalism student, perhaps two, to study at Boston University and Leningrad University. The other would provide for New England and Soviet newspapers to exchange columns about daily life. Danily F. Kramenov, deputy chairman of the Union of Journalists, that's in the Soviet Union, said he would have to clear the proposals with his union, don't you bet it's his union, but added he believed it would approve them. Ted Holmberg, president of the New England Society of Newspaper Editors, said he expected the campaign to begin in mid-1984 with 3 reporters from each country working in the other country for 3 months. But Mr. Kramenov said he thought the first exchange would involve fewer reporters and would not last the full 3 months. Okay, I'm sorry I bored you with the whole thing. If I had edited that, I could have done that in half the time. But anyhow, let's call Ted Holmberg and see if we can get him, because there is such a screaming fallacy in that little New York Times Associated Press News Dispatch that I wonder what Mr. Holmberg would say about it. And I also wonder if the exchange is going to go through between the New England journalists and the Soviet journalists after the catastrophe of 007. We have a real hero, we broadcasters. Vladimir Danchev, an English-language newscaster for Moscow Radio. You know, they're foreign. Like we have Voice of America, they have Radio Moscow broadcasting around the world in all languages. He described the Soviet troops in Afghanistan as invaders. He repeated, at least we heard in the West, that he repeated this was not a mistake, it was not an error, the way the Soviets tried to pretend it was. He meant it. He disappeared. Here's the way it looks in the press. 5 times Mr. Danchev told listeners around the world that Afghanistan was the victim of Soviet aggression. Regular listeners have noticed that Mr. Danchev has been off the air since Monday afternoon. This is several weeks ago. This is back in May. And officials at Moscow Radio refused to comment on the broadcast or on Mr. Danchev's whereabouts. A Western reporter who telephoned Danchev's home was told by a maid that he had, quote, gone out for a walk Tuesday and had not returned. Later telephone calls to the Danchev house went unanswered. Are we broadcasters going to give an evening of our lives to get together and pass some resolution to honor Vladimir Danchev? Are we going to have a Danchev society? Many people in our business are afraid to anger a sponsor, for crying out loud, much less a program director or a station manager or a station owner or a member of the board of directors. Here is one man. Now, he knew his chances. He knew what would happen to him if he spoke the truth. The Soviet troops are invaders. He went on the air and spoke the truth, and what in the hell have we done for our colleague Vladimir Danchev? Absolutely nothing. We deserve very little applause for having yawned, repeated the story, and gone about our very nice, pleasant, prosperous, free lives. What can we do for Vladimir Danchev? Leave that as a hangover question. Catastrophe that I would like to bring up, and that is
How many of you forgot this? How come nobody's mentioned this? Am I the only forgetter on the team here? Did any of you think of this? If so, why didn't you call? If not, why not? What is the Soviet claim? That the Korean airliner violated Soviet airspace deliberately. Now let's talk about violating other people's space deliberately, and with what? With what did the West violate Soviet airspace deliberately? With a civilian aircraft widely alleged, not just by Moscow, but some people in the middle are beginning to pick up Moscow's line and say they had spy equipment on board. Let's grant them that. They may have had something like that on board. Let's also grant that they may have had stuff on board that would serve Western intelligence more valuably than the spy satellites going overhead. Big deal. Is it as if this is the one and only violation, act of espionage? Every Soviet journalist, every not ours, every Soviet journalist, every diplomat, I presume theirs and ours. There is just so very much espionage. There is so little that can be hidden in the world today. And you know something? That's a great thing for peace. The better espionage gets, the greater are the chances of peace. If the people who pretend to want peace really want peace, then they would quit picketing tough senators who want big budgets. They would quit banning the bomb and burning the ban and nuclear-free zones and weapons, nuclear-frees and weapons reductions. They would campaign for more money for a better CIA. They would prevail upon their children to get smart and get in the CIA so that we would have a better CIA. Remember, better espionage is, the better chance peace has. And we're getting more and more sophisticated. But back to my original point, what is really the status internationally of the violation of space intentionally with spy or other military unwelcome tools, devices, equipment? How could we forget within the past year that incredible comic opera drama of the Soviet submarine, whiskey-class submarine that got itself trapped in Sweden, in the archipelago, those rocky islands, got trapped, got hung up, not in Swedish territorial waters, but on top of Swedish soil, rock. The big joke in Sweden, the whole campaign was under the category of whiskey on the rocks. Now, if Sweden had destroyed that Soviet submarine, do you think the same Moscow that now says, justification, it was a spy plane, got what it deserved, valiant hero defenders of the Soviet Union, do it again, and we'll shoot it down again? If the Swedes had destroyed that submarine, do you think Moscow would have said, Sweden, sorry you had to waste a depth charge, sorry you had to go to the trouble, you were absolutely justified in destroying our submarine. We're sorry for all the Soviet sailors trapped on board who perished in that quite justified attack on our submarine. Our submarine could not have been that far off course accidentally. It could have gotten close accidentally, but it is impossible for a submarine to go so far off course that it finds itself high and dry on Swedish rocks. We don't blame you, Sweden. You did right. Congratulations on your sharpshooting. Love, Soviet Union. I don't think that would have echoed forth from the Soviet Union. For how long are we in the West going to put up with the double standard? That's an interesting question. The Soviets aid, arm, abet, finance, and cheer onward so-called wars of liberation all over the world, up to and including Cuba, which they did a very good job with, and Nicaragua and El Salvador. And for us to hint that we're going to send dry flashlight batteries to the Afghan freedom fighters could bring cardiac arrest in our State Department, not to mention on the editorial pages, the television newsrooms, and throughout the faculty. Anything else? I view myself more now as that West Point lieutenant in Vietnam who called artillery in right upon himself because that's where the Viet Cong were. I do not, like most people in my business, brandish the First Amendment like a broken beer bottle, justifying everything that I want to do or say about everybody. There is an arrogance in the media born of habit and being spoiled that we have all the marbles. We can say whatever we want to about anybody. Lawsuit is rare. Now, why is lawsuit rare? Because when somebody brings a lawsuit, the original charge is repeated. It is hammered in. Stephen W. Mosher. This story has everything. He learned, anthropologist, Stanford University, got himself in that big flood of excitement and relationship between China and the United States. All kinds of goodwill was exploded like landmines everywhere. And scholars got in. Steve Mosher got into a little village to do his anthropological research in southern China. And he spoke the dialect of that village. Non-communist, non-Chinese. He won conversations. He emerged with information very damaging to communist China, the most outrageous of which is that women were forced to have abortions in their 9th month of pregnancy, even though they didn't want them, as one measure to curb the Chinese population. So Stanford University got complaints from the communist Chinese. Complaints sounds like, don't litter my lawn anymore. The Chinese communists freaked out. And Stanford University, apparently, I say apparently, we've tried to contact Stanford, we have failed so far. They have apparently yielded to pressure, so they had to serve Mr. Mosher's head to the communist Chinese, and he was fired. He was, dismissed from the doctoral program by a vote of 17-0, some outrageous score like that. And Mr. Mosher went ahead. Maybe Stanford won't give him a PhD for a thesis, but I'm going to give him 2 hours on WMCA by virtue of his experience in his book entitled Broken Earth, The Rural Chinese. Understand, people who feel like me are not vindictive. We're not after vengeance. If we sound vengeful, that hot dog, the truth is coming out about the Soviet Union, the truth is coming out about mainland China, it's merely because we have sat here boiling in frustration for so many years that the truth is deliberately perverted by those free to tell the truth. I have no animosity towards newspaper people in communist countries who are not free to tell the truth. But I have contempt for my fellow American journalists who are free to tell the truth and just choose not to. The Soviets would simply ban that cartoon. I don't know if you read last Sunday's New York Times, but one of the cartoons, the Times harvests the best cartoons from across the country and gives us the chance to see them every Sunday. Well, it showed a man with a paintbrush going up to the plane, the Soviet plane, and asking the pilot, he had a can of paint in his left hand, a paintbrush in his right hand, and he asked the pilot, do you want 269 little people or one jumbo jet? So that in a Chinese communist village. I will read one paragraph from the New York Times coverage. This is from the New York Times of Tuesday, June the 7th. He, meaning Steve Mosher, also describes a campaign in his village in the spring of 1980 to force abortions on pregnant women who were not permitted to have children under Peking's strict birth control rules. At a family planning meeting he attended, he wrote, a local official told the pregnant women, none of you have any choice in this matter. The 2 of you who are 8 or 9 months pregnant will have a cesarean, Mr. Mosher quotes the official as saying. The rest of you will have a shot that will cause you to abort. In a nearby village, Mr. Mosher asserted a woman 7 months pregnant who had no sons had an ordered abortion and was found to have been carrying twin boys. The woman's husband, Mr. Mosher wrote, went into a fury. He went to the home of the official who had ordered the abortion. Seizing the man's 2 sons, aged 8 and 10, he wrote, he heaved them into the courtyard well and then leaped in himself. All 3 drowned. Stephen Mosher will tell us more on the next edition of my evening broadcast.
I call about that. I call about abstentions in relation to the massacre of the 269.
Right.
Are you aware, Barry, that 2 black congressmen abstained in the vote yesterday in the House of Congress?
No, I wasn't.
In today's time...
I read the New York Times very quickly.
Well, it's buried between the lettuce and the tomato heads, as my friend says. Conyers and one other, identified as members of the Black Caucus, voted present. That's voting as an abstention. because it was too critical of the Soviet Union.
Oh, wait, I almost want to do something unprofessional. I almost want to leave, walk away, and get the New York Times. I'll tell you why.
I can't tell you the page, but it's...
Well, no. I'm going to get the New York Times. Wait, Nicole's going to get it for me. Because I think it is a tremendous breach. I feel shortchanged by the New York Times today. How dare they run a headline that says, Congress passes a resolution, hundreds to zero, without saying, comma, 2 abstentions.
Yes.
That is you cannot tell me. Now, let's see, I've got the New York Times in front of me.
In there.
Well, now, wait a minute. House condemns Soviet in 416 to nothing vote. Now, that's all it says. Now, wait, let me read.
Go ahead.
Oh, brother, you have really got something here. Listen to this.
Go ahead.
By Martin Tolchin, Washington, September the 14th. In a rare display of bipartisan unity, the House voted 416 to nothing today to condemn the Soviet destruction of Korean Airlines Flight 007 as one of the most infamous and reprehensible acts in history. Now, here we are. 2 liberal Democrats from Detroit voted present. They were Representatives John Conyers, Jr. and George W. Crockett, Jr., both members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Aides said they were troubled by the strident tone of the resolution. All right, now, I'm not troubled by that. Look, how troubled were you with Janet Rankin, the Congresswoman in 1941, who voted against war with Japan after they bombed Pearl Harbor?